The weather had turned against her. Cecilia had been a mere 300 yards from the service station, which was her only non-suicidal way of getting across the M6, and the heavens had opened. Lunchtime on a Wednesday meant comparative fewer cars using the services and therefore fewer people to witness the sight of the jumble-dressed Cecilia tripping over wet sods of earth as she made it to the southbound services, dripping wet and not in the best of moods. The hand dryers in the ladies' toilets had been her godsend. She knew that someone from the services, possibly a stern-looking, barrel-shaped woman who had been operating the till in the cafe, or a sharp-suited manager type, would be trying to find her, considering the amount of time she had spent in there. And the rest, undercover, though leaning against the stark, white tiles of the walls were hardly luxurious, were enough to make her be thankful for modernity. Cecilia had raised more than a few eyebrows, mainly from services staff, when she went to spend the last of the money she had stolen from the Scarborough hotel room on a coffee and a sandwich, sitting as far from the counter and the gossiping women with hands alternatively held over their faces, clearly whispering about her, and let her gaze fall upon the proto-mountains of the Lake District, the bigger ones, in the very center of the national park, being hidden in unexpected and irksome precipitation. If only she had trusted her instinct rather than doubted it and looked for more solid evidence of where she was. If only she had not decided to make it to a village close to the edge of the Yorkshire Dales so she could prove to herself that she was heading in the right direction rather than just going. She wouldn't be a sopping wet escapee political employee on the run back to her son. Instead she would be a dry one. Why was it that whenever it came to it she had to prove to herself she was doing the right thing rather than having faith in herself? Inhaling, then sipping at the surprisingly quite pleasant coffee that the cardboard cup contained, Cecilia imagined the near future, and this time doubts appeared in her mind when the conjuring of the time when she would be with Septimus had always been so clear. She thought, knew, even, that they would be reunited as a happy family, that Remus would agree to return with her to Edgeford. He had left when Aberforth had died and she had been sent to Durmstrang. A cold, heartless letter had told her this, which she had gladly shredded to the four winds from the top of the Sky Tower the moment she had read it, and that Septimus would be with them too. All would be well. Now, with less than a day in her stride, Cecilia mused at the journey she had undertaken, across limestone chalk in the glorious summer, lying beneath the heavens watching satellites cross the sky overhead, borrowing on a medium-term basis what she needed to keep on to her son. What was to say that he didn't think that she'd just deserted him? Left him alone to fend for himself? He adored his father, and Cleus too. Her mind drifted to his face. Septimus. When she had told him she would be away for a few weeks. She guessed Remus must have told him the truth eventually, yet he continued to write, his address being the cottage near Helvellyn, Remus's cottage, to her mind, telling her about his new school, about exploring, about his new friend. Remus, when he had visited in June, when they had made up and he had given her renewed hope that their lives together weren't over, had told her how pleased he was that she was doing well at Durmstrang, but that he missed her. That was Septimus, stoic and accepting. A pang of motherly love brought a tear to her eye. Her only son, her hope, her future. If only he knew how much she cared for him, how much he was with her every day, in her heart, that she would have chosen to be arrested by Cleus and been held in custody after her, well, what she now considered to be her breakdown, rather than have been sent away had it not been for him. Dashing the self-destructive thoughts from her mind, she allowed the now reappearing scenery in the west to be her meditation. She had to cross the motorway, but that was easy. The covered walkway between the two service stations was behind her, and then, up and over the first hill and ever more in the distance. A sharp northwest after half a mile and follow the culvert towards Thirlmere. As long as there was no more rain she would have a pleasant night in Fawcett Forest, just west of Horsdale, on the border of the national park itself. If not, she would have to get on with a damp night. Not much to complain about considering all the beautiful nights she had spent in the Dales. then on to Kirkstone Pass, watching the tourists weave their way down and up the slopes. A sharp left turn would lead her to then onto the land north of Rydal, where Septimus's tiny school presumably was and, with Thirlmere only a couple of miles away and Remus's, Callias's, cottage would be there. Draining the cup and taking a few bites of the sandwich, she bundled the rest up inside her coat and, grabbing a handful of napkins, Cecilia walked steadily but determinedly across the M6 and towards her son. 88,888,888. Septimus had woken early. The sun's intense rays that he had been used to rousing him had given way to a duller sky. It had rained in the night, but he hadn't worried about Owl flying about. The tag which had come with his cage had advised him to let him out at night where he was able to catch his own food. At least, that was what he thought the tag said. Tag probably wasn't the best description for the mass of information that was enclosed in the scroll that had accompanied Owl. Half a book was more like it. But the language was rather strange. It seemed to be written in English where Septimus could read it, but halfway through it switched to a different language and at the bottom had gone through several more before finally finishing in what looked like Egyptian hieroglyphics. In the vein of every male alive though, Septimus had let Owl out for a fly before he had read any of the label. He whirled and swooped, basking in the cool air in the open countryside and, as he flew out of sight, Septimus felt a lurch in his stomach that perhaps letting him out so soon was the wrong thing to do. Had he lost him for being so careless? Septimus worried for a good 3 minutes, but his angst was replaced with joy when Owl flitted back, coming in through the window with a crash onto the bed, twitting shrilly before hopping onto Septimus's pillow and onto the windowsill before launching himself off into the air again. Flicking the parchment over on Owl's cage, Septimus had been quite relieved to see that he had done what appeared to be advised. Owl had come back to the window several times in the night, and presumably had continued to do so when Septimus had been asleep. He'd left his window open, despite the dampening in weather, and had been greeted with 3 corpses of field mice, probably all that the tiny bird would have been able to carry in its miniature claws. Owl, mused Septimus as his little pet, his first at that, arrived back to the window ledge to peck at the bodies of the mice, and he stroked his downy head affectionately, smiling as he arched his feathery neck into the rub. It wasn't the most imaginative name, he could stick with it. He'd not given the idea of a name for the owl a thought when Cleus had told him he could have one, so delighted he had been that his uncle had been so generous to him. And if he decided to go to Hedgewoods, he knew that, amongst the noble names that other owls would have been given, the poor thing might feel rather plain. In an effort to find a suitable moniker for his adorable Athena, he had read, the evening before, through the History of Hedgewoods book, which had also come home with them from Diagonally, not half so exciting as Soon Not to Be Owl, though, in search of inspiration. Then he had turned to the label on the cage. Anaxagoras' Animal Emporium, he read, here is a small gift of the world's biggest animal seller. Underneath another sentence read, Voici un adorial Paar. And below that, in German, hier ist ein Giftos. After that was a cross to indicate a spell was needed for further languages, but no advice as to which one should be used. As Septimus had never really used spells, he didn't bother trying to extend the list. After all, there was a big enough label attached to Owl's cage as it was. Heaven knows how much paper might have appeared in his room. But the translation between the languages was rather poor, in Septimus's opinion. In German, Septimus knew, gift meant venom, something which he had seen so often on his mother's chemicals when she had done work at home, and he was sure that the owner didn't mean that the owl was poisonous. Nothing had sprung out at him, not even from the words on the tag, and Septimus had considered that would have been the best source for information. Had Owl been a female, he might have considered Adorial, which sounded far too girly for a boy owl. But no, nothing had risen that he had thought, yes, that's your name. Owl it was then, for now. I'd better clean up the mess on the floor before Uncle K sees it, said Septimus, tickling Owl's head again. Owl Pip to reply before bending his head low and tearing into the center of one of the deceased mice. Stepping away, Septimus looked inside the cage and considered that he probably needed a little more straw too. The starter bag that had come with Owl was down in the kitchen, and so, leaving Owl to his breakfast, he opened his bedroom door, hoping that Cleus had not left an awakening spell on his door. For it wasn't just the excitement of his owl that had kept Septimus up for part of the night and had woken him up so early. Today, Septimus was going with Cleus to Hedgewood's School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Only for a visit, he added to himself as he went down the wooden stairs 2 by 2, wheeling around the banister pillar and into the kitchen. Cleus was going to speak to Severus Snape, and he had wondered aloud over dinner the previous night. Cleus had even taken time to cook beef and summer vegetables by himself for them, followed by ice cream, whether Septimus would like to come for a look round. 2 hours later, one clean room, a sleeping owl in his cage and eaten shreddies, Septimus was sitting in the living room waiting for his uncle to get together everything he needed. "How are we going to get there?" Septimus asked, his excitement coming to a head. "Will we be flying?" "Too slow today," replied Cleus, getting together things apparently to Septimus at random, and he mooched around the living room and in the kitchen, filling a box with things. "I suppose you're wondering what I'm doing, eh?" Septimus nodded. "Yes," he added when he realized that his uncle couldn't see him. "Just some everyday things from around here, that's what I'm collecting up," said Cleus, giving Septimus a wink. "You'll see." He stopped walking around distractedly and looked at his nephew. "And no, we're not flying. We have permission from the ministry to disapparate today, just outside the Edgestones. Because, of course, no one can apparate or disapparate inside the grounds of Hedgewoods," thought Septimus, running the sentence over in his mind. Sam had told him, as to his father and mother, in the past. And it had been the opening sentence in the Hedgewoods history book that he had, to his own amazement, read a little of the previous night after Cleus had asked him if he wanted to come with him. 20 minutes later and he and Cleus were outside, a sack, as if he were Father Christmas, slung over his shoulder, and they held hands. Uncle K had explained it was far more exciting if they were outside and far less stressful on the digestive system. Septimus wasn't listening to the details though, just the thought of disapparating to Hedgewoods was making him very excited, although he did wish, as they landed with a bump on a hillock, that he had paid just a little more attention to Uncle K's flight instructions. "Bend your knees," I said, Cleus chided jokingly as Septimus rolled onto the grass. "Here," he said, gripping him by the crook of the arm. "There. Now," he added as Septimus bent over, heaving. "It can take you like that," he said, waiting for Septimus to get over it. As the wave of nausea passed, Septimus stood up, freezing at the magnificent sight before him. He'd seen the school from photographs before. The one of his father and some of the reciprocators, probably standing close to where they were now with the castle in the background. The woodcut on his book. Postcards, descriptions in his mind from those who knew the school, but this, it was beyond words. Magnificent was nothing to describe the majesty, strength, splendor of the building, growing as it appeared to be, from the rock around it, skirted by the large lake. The Black Lake, Septimus knew. "Impressive, isn't it?" Cleus said as he saw his nephew's face. He took Septimus's hand and led him a few steps before pointing down. "And here are the Edgestones. We cross those and Snape will know we're here." "Are they talking?" Cleus nodded, heaving the sack back onto his shoulder. He leaned further forward, trying to catch anything discernible. "They're talking Igneous," said Cleus, smiling. "But that's just their type, isn't it? We're in Scotland. These are volcanic rocks. Igneous." "Yes, that's right, but that's their language too. It's not a spell that lets the headmaster of Hedgewoods know that we're here. They talk to one another, pass it between the stones right up to the castle, through its foundations, through its walls. "That's so cool," Septimus half-whispered as Cleus stepped over the boundary. As he did so, the chattering got louder. "Wow! This way," Cleus said, not looking back as he climbed to the zenith of the hill. "Come on, there's a better view from here." An hour later, and Septimus had been given strict instructions where he was not to explore. The castle was being modified for the incoming non-wizard students, and it was more dangerous than usual. Grinning inwardly, Septimus left Professor Snape's office in the company of a house elf who had looked as if he would faint as Professor Snape, his gimlet eyes fixing on the magical creature, reiterated what he had said to Septimus, and he descended the spiral staircase with a map of the castle grounds and, when he got to the bottom, looked to his right in the direction of the Great Hall. "A good choice, sir," wittered the house elf, dithering by his side, his too long for him Hedgewood's clothing gathering at his ankles. "If you don't mind me saying so, sir, you look too young to be in the ministry. How is the training progressing? You've not told me of any resignations, so good, I trust." "Better than I expected, I must admit." Severus Snape slipped from behind his desk, probably the first headmaster in Hedgewood's history to wear leather trousers. Although it may have passed over Binns, the rest were enthusiastic. "However, your policy has gone down well. You'll not find many teachers against the idea of teaching their subject. It's a challenge." Snape nodded at the bag that Cleus had struggled with over the grounds of the castle. "We're making the adaptations in line with James's recommendations. The curriculum has a few adjustments still to be made with it and, as you saw, the builders are in. I take it you have some objects there?" "Just a few," admitted Cleus, crossing the flagstone floor and tipping it onto Snape's desk. The headmaster's eyes scrutinized the bag's contents. "Teapot, alarm clock, pajamas. You think the castle's spells need to be adapted to recognize a teddy bear?" "You've been a teacher at this school for a long time, Snape," replied Cleus smoothly, "and you're honestly telling me that you don't think some of the school's first years, fourth years even, bring their own cuddly toys?" Severus Snape's eyes narrowed. "And these are all from Cecilia Lupin's house? Genuine non-wizard possessions? I believe the teddy bear is Septimus's," he added. "It'll take a few hours, then you can take them back with you. I couldn't deprive the lad of his teddy bear. I think it might have been forgotten recently. As his next of kin, I thought it only right to be the one to get him his first pet, especially if he decides that Hedgewood's is the school for him in a couple of weeks' time." "You don't sound so sure." Snape paced a couple of steps towards Cleus. "And yet you've presumed." He stopped, then added, "You talk as if both his parents are dead." Cleus paused for a moment. Snape was always going to be sensitive around the topic of Cecilia Lupin, but he knew it must be addressed before the joint heads of the Reciprocator movement could get on with business. "There's been protests, of course, but nothing of consequence." They eyed each other carefully. Neither one would ever have been able to say where mistrust came from. Snape had never fallen for Cleus's charmed talk. Cleus knew that he owed Snape for the brilliance he had never had. They had taken over Aberforth's role, and their predecessor could never have chosen better, on paper at least. But maybe he knew more than he appeared to for. Despite it all, they did manage to work. There was a professionalism between them. From the frame above the fireplace, Aberforth Dumbledore winked, ever so slightly. "Both are alive. We have detected Cecilia." Snape raised an eyebrow. "It is not discernible exactly where she is, but she is in TH country. There is only a limited amount of places where she would be heading, of course." "And you've told Septimus his mother is alive and in the country?" He did look a little more at ease than when I saw him last. "And when was that, precisely?" thought Cleus. "A question arises. Have you not given the child false hope? She may not be on her way to see him, especially after the role you have given to her. You don't know where she will go." "We can but see." But I did not recall her. She came of her own free will. Her own willfulness got her here, and the most precious thing to Cecilia, as we know, is Septimus. She's bound to be trying to find him. You've not heard from her, I take it? Snape shook head. My last correspondence was over 18 months ago. A long pause lingered between them before Snape made his way to the fireplace. Pulling his wand from the back of his trousers, a dangerous place to stow a wand, or it would be had Snape not taken adequate precautions. He tapped on the fireplace. It slid grindingly, stone on stone, up behind the wall to reveal a set of steps leading round in a spiral. I expect you'd like to see what changes have been made to the castle. If you'd accompany me, we'll go this way. Before we go, there is something I must discuss with you, Severus. Snape paused sharply. Callias Lupin had only ever once called him by his first name, and that was when he had thanked him for devising the wolfsbane potion that had allowed him to control his lycanthropy. Remus and Sirius. They're still unconscious and still in St. Mungo's. How does the progress of Any Hope for My Brother go? Have you been able to come up with something? A change in Cleus's usual self-assured tone made Severus Snape pause, unused as he was to the wizard's humility. Until they awake, I can administer nothing, as I've explained. Has there been a change in either's condition then? They've begun to feed Remus animal blood by drip. He was failing until someone suggested it. His body had rejected the glucose and minerals. On the one hand, it is good news for him. He is still with us. But on the other, Snape added, completing the rest of Cleus's unspoken sentence, it is more likely he has taken on vampiristic traits. Septimus had had the best few hours of his life as the house elf, to whom he had admitted he was actually a student and not from the ministry, helped him explore. The magical creature had relaxed from its groveling state and was now far more chatty, saying he wished he had lived now and might have had a chance of coming to the school as a student. They had seen the dormitories, been in some of the classrooms. Septimus had resisted the urge to take anything off any shelves, for he knew too well that it may spell doom, had visited the library and spoken to Madam Pince about the library books, wondering why they appeared spine backwards with the edges of their pages showing, because that's how they're supposed to be displayed. There's nothing on the spines, we have to write the book titles in the page edges, and been outside to see the Quidditch pitch. He'd glanced up to the owlery too, knowing that Owl would be there soon, with the other owls, collecting and delivering mail. Knowing he would be there? Was that his decision, then? Pausing by the wall of final year student photographs, he found his father, standing with Sirius Black, James and Lily Potter and other people he knew of, smiling and waving, and in some cases cheering, and in one poor boy's case, vomiting. Perhaps he always knew he would be here, despite what his mother wanted. I understand this is yours. The voice grated near his ear and his blood ran a little chillier than it had done whilst he had perused the student pictures. Septimus turned, knowing exactly who was standing behind him. If that's all, sir, I'll return to the kitchen, stammered the house elf, scuttling away towards the great hall. And he was holding his teddy bear. Why was he holding Ted? Your uncle kindly brought some objects with him when you came to the castle. You may have noticed the sack. His lips turned up at the corners. It was a joke. Septimus relaxed a little when he realized that the headmaster wasn't being serious. You're there, sir, said Septimus, pointing to a stone-faced youth at the back of the picture that his father was in. Indeed. He held out Ted. Your uncle has had to, unfortunately, return to the ministry. I offered to return the objects, and yourself, back to your uncle's cottage. He began to walk towards the great hall. After a few moments Septimus followed, walking quickly to keep up. No Uncle K tonight, then. Just as he was getting used to him being around. As they turned the corner into the foyer of the main entrance of the castle, avoiding a block hammer that one of the builders had accidentally dropped, Snape freezing it in midair before levitating it back to the embarrassed wizard. He asked about Septimus's decision about attending the school. "I think so," replied Septimus, but dash. "But dash? Mum always wanted me to go to a non-wizard school." "I see. You worked with Mum, didn't you?" Septimus wondered if he'd said too much, but the wizard, rather than admonishing him, smiled a little. "Indeed. Your mother is a singular woman. I do believe that she would prefer you to make a free choice. Do you know about the changes that are happening in the school's history not a week from now?" Septimus nodded. "You're accepting non-wizards. I expect that's what the builders are in for." "Yes. And these objects that your uncle brought with him today. We have to train the castle's main spells to recognize these objects if they are brought in by non-wizards next week. Otherwise there'll be a lot of tidying up to do as they arrive." They crossed the courtyard and headed down the path that he had climbed with his struggling uncle. "Professor, can I ask you about Mum? Uncle K said she was alive, and in the country." "Then he is sure to be right. He wouldn't have told you that if it weren't true. What would you like to ask me? What did Mum do when she worked with you?" "Science," replied Snape, simply. "She helped us with our work. We could not have done some of the things we have done without her. As I said, she is a singular woman, courageous, intelligent. She taught too. Callias says Mum's been found, but I'm worried." "You're right to be worried. And it shows you are growing up." They began to descend, along the path Septimus and Cleus had taken. "When I met you at Grimmauld Place, years ago, you said I was too young to read Mum's book about Harry Potter." "Why did you say that?" "Because you were too young," said Snape, picking his way carefully past the gamekeeper's cottage. "Am I too young now?" A few moments of silence passed between them, then Snape stopped abruptly, Septimus slipping a little to stop himself falling into Snape. "Do you think you're too young?" "I'm not sure." "And you don't know whether you'd like to come to this school to learn?" Septimus opened his mouth, then closed it. "When you can answer those questions, you'll know if you're old enough." They walked in silence to the Edgestones, their igneous chatter growing louder now Septimus knew to listen to it. "I understand your uncle bought you an owl. You're a very fortunate young man. Owls are rather expensive. What is his name?" He crossed the Edgestones with the interjection still hanging. "Owl. But I'm still thinking of a proper name for him. Are we disapparating back?" "We are." "Oh great," thought Septimus, his heart sinking. "Bend your knees this time. At least you know what to expect." Somehow that made it worse. "Mervine," said Snape as he held his wand aloft. "It means Great King." As they swirled into the ether, Septimus's last thought was, "Mervin, it suits my little owl."